The first time anyone saw Longbeard, the sea went quiet. Not calm, quiet, as if the ocean itself had stopped breathing to listen. It happened off the Flagler Coast, where merchant routes braided across open water like veins beneath skin. The day had begun ordinary. There was a pale sunrise, a steady wind, gulls arguing over invisible scraps, the kind of morning sailors trusted, the kind of morning that made men forget that the world was older than their prayers. Then the fog came. Not a natural fog, not the kind that rolled in soft and gray, smelling of cold and distant rain. This fog arrived with weight, thick as wool and bitter as burnt herbs. It swallowed the horizon first, then the waves, then the ship itself. Men on deck shouted and laughed nervously, as men do when they're trying to convince their own hearts to behave. Lanterns were lit, though the sun still shone above the haze. Hands tightened around ropes and railings. Somewhere below, a cook dropped a pot and cursed. Someone else muttered a verse to a divine they couldn't properly name. And then, a shape moved inside the fog. Not a gull, not a drifting plank, not a whale cresting, a ship. It emerged like a thought dragged up from a nightmare, long, black, and wrong. Its sails were torn, but the tiers looked deliberate, like claw marks. Its hull was carved with old sigils that didn't belong to any port and hadn't belonged to any age this crew knew. The figurehead at the bow wasn't a lion or a saint or a goddess. It was a jaw, a gaping, monstrous jaw with teeth that looked like spines from a sea serpent. Water poured from its mouth in a constant cascade, as though the ocean itself was trapped in its throat. The merchant captain on the Flagler route, an older man named Harrow Vane, stared so long he forgot to breathe. Then the fog shifted, and Harrow saw the man at the helm. Longbeard, 6'5", built like something forged from tide and violence, not bulky like a dockhand, not lean like a knife fighter. He was the kind of strength that looked earned. Every line of his body suggested he had wrestled storms and won. He wore a captain's hat low over his brow, his long black hair pulled back with meticulous care beneath it, as if vanity was the one gentle habit he allowed himself. His beard was dark and thick, hanging just above his neckline, neat enough to imply a steady hand, wild enough to promise that steadiness could snap. But it was his eyes that ended the talking. Green, not dull, not pale, green like fresh grass after rain, like spring refusing to die. They weren't warm, they weren't cruel, they were uninterested, as if everything in front of him was either prey or weather, something to cross through, something to use, something to outlast. His crew moved around him with a strange coordination, not the sloppy hustle of drunk pirates, but a synchronized efficiency that felt more like ritual than labor. They never strayed too far from him. Their eyes flicked to him the way a compass needle flicks north, involuntary, obedient, terrified. And Longbeard, he didn't shout. He didn't roar orders like a dockside tyrant. He barely moved. He simply raised one hand, slow, deliberate. The fog thickened. Smoke curled along the water like ink poured into a bowl. And Harrow Vane understood, suddenly and completely, that this was not a man who had taken the sea. This was a man the sea had accepted. No one knew his birth. No one knew his real name. No kingdom claimed him. No guild recorded him. No court whispered about him like they whispered about noble bastards and lost heirs. He simply appeared one day and began tearing ships apart. At first it was dismissed as rumor, sailors' fear dressed up in story. A new pirate, they said, a raider from the western tropics, a ghoul gone rogue, an Alacroc warlord with delusions of grandeur. But then the losses stacked. A spice-laden carrack vanishing between two ports as if it had never existed. A fishing flotilla found adrift, nets still in the water, crews gone without blood or struggle. Just gone. A courier ship from Olympus turning up burned to the waterline, its hull stained with soot that refused to wash away. And always, the survivors told the same story. Fog, smoke, water that moved wrong, a ship that looked like it had crawled out of ancient sea graves, a captain who didn't laugh, didn't threaten, didn't bargain, only watched, judged, and took. They began calling him Longbeard because they needed a word, and fear always wants a handle to grip. And because when they described him, that beard was always there, dark, heavy, unmoving, as fate. He became a myth faster than he became a man. The ports adapted, routes changed, captains hired more guards, merchants paid tribute to coastal mercenaries. The Nexu Council issued warnings about ocean travel, and their messengers used phrases like unregulated ability user, threat to trade stability, and hostile hybrid, but nothing slowed him. It was as if Longbeard wasn't hunting wealth. He was hunting choice. Longbeard looked human until he didn't. Up close enough to smell salt and smoke on him, there were signs. His skin wasn't merely tanned. It had a faint sheen, like scales hiding under flesh. Along his neck and collarbone, patches of blue hardened armor rose in subtle plates, catching lantern light like whetstone. And beneath that armor, something darker. He was a hybrid ghoul and Alacroc blended into one body like a curse stitched into blood. His ghoul side carried the chill, the hidden violence, the retractable claws capable of tearing rope, wood, and bone with equal ease. His strength was obscene, 4 to 7 times stronger than an ordinary human, the kind of power that didn't flex for show because it never needed to. And then there was the Cocoon. Most men did not see it, because the ones who got close enough to see it usually didn't survive long enough to describe it. But there were whispers, always whispers, about how Longbeard's body changed when he chose to truly act. They said his muscles hardened, thickened, became something else entirely. They said a liquid strength rolled beneath his skin like a living tide. They said his posture shifted, predatory, inevitable. The Cocoon was a predatory organ, a weapon grown inside him, flexible and robust, like liquid muscle that could become solid in an instant. It could reinforce his physique. It could sharpen his stamina and agility. It could turn him into something built for hunting in darkness. And then, his Alacroc blood gave him the sea. A long, powerful tail hidden beneath heavy coats and layered belts, blue scales that acted like armor, red spike-like scales lining his spine, fierce, protective, ancient. He moved with a strange grace for someone so large, as if the ocean itself had taught him balance. He was not a monster pretending to be a man. He was a man who had long ago decided monster was just another word people used when they didn't get to win. Longbeard's Nexu did not crackle with theatrical fire or sparkle with courtly light. It seeped. It crawled. It arrived like a bad omen and left like a funeral hymn. Water Nexu, wielded with ruthless precision. He could shape currents, pull ships sideways, choke sails by turning wind-driven waves into grasping hands. He could calm water into glass beneath his own hull, while the sea around his prey bucked like an angry beast. He could summon a wall of seawater so sudden it looked like the ocean had stood up, and smoke Nexu. Worse, not simple smoke from a torch or cannon fire. This smoke was Nexu-born, thick, bitter, alive with purpose. It blinded lookouts, muffled screams, made lantern flames dim and die. It filled lungs and made men cough blood and panic, stumbling over their own feet because they could not see the hands reaching for them. Water to seize, smoke to hide. Together, they made him a myth that moved. Longbeard did not raid like a desperate man. He raided like someone fulfilling a routine. When his ship came alongside another, the encounter was swift and surgical. His crew threw grapnels, climbed rails, cut down defenders with blades and axes and hooked poles meant for deck fighting. They carried no mercy and no joy. Their faces were not bright with cruelty. They looked tired, like men who had learned that survival requires obedience. Longbeard would walk onto the captured deck last, always lasts. He moved through the chaos without hurry, stepping over bodies like they were driftwood. His eyes swept the scene, measuring, weighing, judging. Sometimes he killed without warning, one clean motion, claws flashing out, a throat open as easily as a net bag. Sometimes he spared, not out of kindness, out of disinterest. He took survivors as prisoners. Slavery was not uncommon in the darker veins of the sea, and Longbeard treated it as business, cold, calculated, efficient. Prisoners were cargo, labor, leverage, currency. He didn't apologize. He didn't justify. He did what he wanted. And he was never told what to do. That, more than the killing, was what terrified the world. Because countries could bargain with pirates. Guilds could bribe raiders. Councils could threaten criminals. But how do you negotiate with a man who answers to nothing? How do you punish someone who treats punishment like weather? The tragedy of Longbeard was not that he killed. Tragedy was that he killed without knowing why it still hurt. Because it did hurt. Not in the way good men feel guilt, not in the way villains feel pleasure. Longbeard carried something older, something like a wound that had healed wrong and kept cracking open every time the sea grew quiet. He didn't dream like ordinary men. His sleep, when it came, brought him the Akumas, the ancient era when the world had been carved by war and divines and hunger, when the sea had been a battlefield for things too old to have names in modern tongues. Longbeard had lived since then. And in his mind, time was not a straight road. It was a tide. It came back. It returned. It dragged old bones to shore again and again. He remembered storms that had swallowed islands. He remembered blood in water so thick it turned waves black. He remembered laughter, his own, echoing over decks that no longer existed. And he remembered a name, not Longbeard, a name spoken by someone whose face he could no longer keep. A name that was tied to a promise, and a betrayal, and a choice that had made him the thing he was now. He hated that memory, not because it was painful, because it was human. There was, eventually, a captain foolish enough to try to end him, not with an army, not with mercenaries, not with council decrees, with understanding. Her name was Captain Celine Maris, a trader-turned-privateer from Olympus, known for escorting ships through dangerous waters and for refusing bribes from pirates who thought they could buy her off. Celine had lost her younger brother on a route that should have been safe. The ship had vanished. No wreckage, no survivors. The only thing recovered was a single piece of wood, part of a railing, stained with smoke that smelled like bitterness and old ash. Celine did not cry when she received it. She didn't smash a bottle or scream at the sea. She simply stared at that wood for a long time, then said quietly, "Find me the thing that did this." So she hunted Longbeard, not with desperation, but patience. She studied where he struck, what he took, what he ignored. She asked survivors how his ship moved, how the fog smelled, how his crew spoke, what symbols marked his hull. She learned that Longbeard avoided certain waters, reefs near old ruins, currents that flowed too close to drowned temples. She learned that he never raided ships carrying only food. He wanted labor, metal, tools, and people with skill. And she learned something else. Longbeard's ship, despite its terror, was not invincible. It was hungry. It returned repeatedly to a specific stretch of sea where the fog always thickened at dusk, where the water temperature shifted unnaturally, where sailors swore they heard bells ringing under the waves, a place they called Hollow Water. Celine waited there with 3 ships hidden in a crescent formation. Sails down, lanterns covered, Nexu users stationed at key points, wind manipulators to hold the fog at bay, Earth users to anchor hulls, a water adept to counter currents. She planned it like a net. And when Longbeard came, as she knew he would, the fog rolled in. The ship emerged, and Celine stepped forward onto her bow, cloak snapping in the damp wind, and called into the smoke. Longbeard, no threats, no curses, just the name. His ship slowed. Not because it was trapped, because he chose to listen. Longbeard stood at the helm, eyes like green sea glass, and watched Celine with an expression that suggested he was trying to decide if she was entertaining or inconvenient. His crew did not speak. Celine's men gripped blades. The sea held its breath. Celine lifted her chin. "I know what you are." Longbeard's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a sneer. "Do you?" "You're not just a pirate," she said. "You're older than the roots you prey on, older than the councils that condemn you, older than the stories that made you a ghost." Longbeard's gaze sharpened by a fraction. "Careful, Captain." Celine's voice stayed steady. "My brother died on your sea." A pause. Longbeard's eyes flicked, briefly, like a tide shifting around a rock. "Many die on my sea," he said. "Do you remember them?" Celine asked, and there it was. The challenge hidden under grief. Longbeard's hand rested on the rail, fingers curling. His nails, human-looking, could become claws in a heartbeat. "No." Celine swallowed. "Then why do you do it?" Longbeard's eyes lifted toward the fog, as if he could see something beyond it. "Because I can," he said simply. "Because the world tells men what to do until they forget how to want. I do not forget." Celine's anger flared, but she forced it down. "You take people. You sell them. You break families apart like it's nothing." Longbeard's gaze returned to her. "It is nothing. A lie." Celine saw it just barely because she was the kind of woman who had learned to read lies the way sailors read clouds. Longbeard's face didn't change, but something in the air did. Smoke curled subtly, creeping along the water as if listening. Celine stepped closer, boots scraping her deck. "What if you didn't have to be this?" Longbeard's eyes narrowed. "What if you stopped talking?" Celine's heart hammered. "No, I won't, not when you're right here." The fog thickened. Longbeard's crew shifted, hands tightening on weapons. Celine's wind users strained, holding the haze back like a living wall. And Longbeard tilted his head slightly, as if he was studying something fragile. Why do you want me to stop? Celine asked softly. Because you're angry, or because you're afraid you'll answer? For the first time, something flickered in Longbeard's expression, not fear, not guilt, recognition, and that recognition was the spark that lit the tragedy fully aflame. Because recognition meant the past had found him again. The bells under the waves began to ring, not loudly, not like a church bell, more like the faint chiming of metal tapping metal, distant and wrong, vibrating through bone more than air. Celine's crew stiffened. Captain, I hear it, Celine murmured. Longbeard's jaw tightened. His green eyes shifted to the water, and for the first time, the sea looked like it made him uneasy. Turn away, he said to Celine, voice low. Celine's throat went dry. You don't get to command me. Longbeard's gaze snapped back up. This is not command. This is mercy. The word didn't belong in his mouth. Celine felt the hairs rise on her arms. What is this place? Longbeard's voice came like a distant storm. A grave. The water beneath his ship darkened, not with shadow, with memory. The fog split suddenly, like a curtain pulled apart, and Celine saw it. Below the surface, faint and impossible, were shapes. Ruins. A city drowned. Towers broken and tilted. Stone arches encrusted with coral. Roads swallowed by sand. And everywhere, bells. Hanging from skeletal frames, from collapsed doorways, from statues whose faces had been eaten away by time. A drowned city that no map recorded. Celine stared, breath caught. How? Longbeard's eyes burned. You do not understand what you have dragged up. Celine looked at him. You know it. Longbeard didn't answer. The bells grew louder. And something beneath the ruins moved. Slow, massive, like a beast shifting in sleep. Celine's water adept whispered, horrified. Captain, there's something alive down there. Longbeard's voice was a rough scrape. Not alive. His claws extended with a sound like tearing cloth. Awake. Celine saw it then. Not the creature beneath the ruins, but the change in Longbeard himself. His cocoon activated. The air around him seemed to tighten, as if his body had suddenly become heavier than it should be. Muscles hardened. His stance widened. His skin, already armored in places, seemed to pulse. Liquid strength rolling beneath it like a tide trapped under stone. Smoke coiled off his shoulders. Water rose around his hull. And in that moment, Celine stopped seeing a pirate. She saw force, a relic from the era of the Akuma, a thing that had outlived kingdoms and kept moving because it didn't know how to stop. Who are you? Celine asked, voice barely audible. Longbeard's eyes, those piercing green eyes, were no longer uninterested. They were ancient. I was a name once, he said quietly. A man once. I made a promise to the sea, and the sea took everything else in return. Celine's breath shook. And now? Now, Longbeard said, I am what remains when a promise rots. The bells screamed. The water erupted. A shape rose from the drowned city, something long and skeletal and crowned in seaweed, with limbs like broken masts and eyes like deep trenches. Celine's crew screamed. Her ships strained against anchors. And Longbeard laughed, not with joy, with inevitability, because chaos was not something that happened to him. Chaos was something that followed him like a shadow. The creature, whatever it was, moved toward Celine's ships first, not because it chose them, because they were closer, because they were new blood in old water. Celine's wind users unleashed gusts, trying to shove fog back, trying to clear sightlines. Her water adept raised a barrier, shaping the sea into a trembling wall. It shattered like glass when the creature hit it. Sailors were flung into the ocean. Masts snapped. Rope whips lashed faces bloody. A man screamed as something dragged him overboard. Celine grabbed the rail, fighting nausea, and looked at Longbeard, expecting him to flee. He didn't. He stepped onto the bow of his own ship like a king stepping onto a throne. Smoke poured from him in thick ribbons, swirling around the creature's face, blinding it, confusing it. Then he lifted both hands, and the sea answered. Water rose in a twisting column, crashing down on the creature's spine like a hammer. It shrieked, the sound vibrating through ship hulls. Longbeard's crew moved with brutal precision, throwing hooked chains, lashing them around the creature's limbs like they were binding an angry god. They didn't hesitate. They didn't pray. They had done this before. Celine's stomach dropped. You fought it. Longbeard's eyes flicked to her. I have fed it. Celine's blood ran cold. What? It wakes, Longbeard said, voice like smoke scraping stone. It hungers. I bring it noise, blood, chaos. It sleeps again. Celine stared at him, horror dawning. You've been sacrificing ships to keep that thing down. Longbeard didn't deny it. He only turned back toward the creature and tightened his fingers, and the water chains snapped taut, yanking the creature's head down beneath the surface. It thrashed. It screamed, and the sea turned red. Celine watched sailors die, her sailors, his prisoners, men from both sides, dragged into water that suddenly felt like a mouth. She lunged forward. Stop! You're killing everyone! Longbeard looked at her then, and there it was, the tragedy in full. He looked like someone who had tried stopping once, and learned the sea didn't care. I am not good, he said, voice low and terrible. I am not evil. I am necessary. Celine shook her head, tears burning. No, you're choosing this. Longbeard's eyes flashed. I choose everything. And then he did what he always did. He chose chaos. He chose death, because it was easier than choosing hope. The creature finally sank, dragged beneath the waves by Longbeard's water nexu, and chained with iron hooks that sank deep into its rotting flesh. The bells quieted slowly, like a song fading. The sea calmed, but the decks remained broken. Bodies floated. Celine's ships were crippled. One was already taking on water. And Longbeard stood amid it all like he had merely finished a chore. Celine staggered onto her ruined bow, blood on her cheek, and stared at him across the shattered space between their ships. You could have told me, she rasped. You could have warned me. Longbeard's expression softened by a fraction. I did, not enough. Longbeard's gaze drifted to the water where blood still swirled like ink. It is never enough. Celine clenched her fists. My brother, Longbeard's eyes returned to her. He didn't look away. Yes, he said simply. Celine's breath broke. She swallowed a sob like it was poison. Why? Longbeard's voice was quiet, because the sea demanded it. Celine's eyes blazed. The sea doesn't demand. You do. For a heartbeat, Longbeard truly looked like a man. Tired, old, hollow. Then the moment vanished. He stepped forward, smoke curling around his boots. Go home, Captain Maris. Celine's voice trembled with rage. I'll hunt you until the sea freezes. Longbeard's mouth curved, almost gentle, almost cruel. Then hunt. He lifted a hand. Smoke poured outward, thick and suffocating, swallowing the space between them. The wind users on Celine's ship fought, but the smoke was Nexu-born and stubborn. When the fog cleared, Longbeard's ship was gone. Only the stink of smoke remained. And the water, still red in places, rolled on as if nothing had happened. Celine limped back to Olympus with a broken fleet and a story no one wanted to believe. She spoke of a drowned city under hollow water, bells beneath the waves, a creature that woke when disturbed, a pirate who fought it like he'd done it 1,000 times. The Nexu Council listened, faces tight, and recorded her testimony with grim silence. Then they did what councils always did. They argued. Some wanted to send a force to investigate. Some wanted to ban all travel through those waters. Some wanted to label Celine unstable from grief. And in the meantime, Longbeard kept sailing, kept raiding, kept feeding chaos to the deep, because he was free. Freedom often came soaked in blood. There were nights, after the screaming and the taking and the smoke, when Longbeard stood alone at the helm and stared into the dark water as if it might reflect a face he had forgotten. His crew avoided him then. Even they, hardened men, criminals, survivors, gave him space when he grew quiet, because quiet was more dangerous than anger. In quiet, Longbeard remembered. He remembered a time before the war between the Akuma and Primordials ended, before the sea was mapped and traded and taxed, before he was called Longbeard. He remembered holding someone's hand on a shoreline that no longer existed. He remembered promising, not to the sea, to a person. And he remembered breaking that promise when the world demanded sacrifice. The tragedy was that he hadn't been born monstrous. He had become monstrous the way storms become storms, by gathering pressure until something had to break. And now he could not stop, because stopping meant facing the question Celine had thrown at him like a spear. Why do you do it? And somewhere deep inside the god of havoc, beneath ghoul claws and alacroc scales, and smoke-wrapped Nexu, there was still a man who was terrified of his own answer. Months after Hollow Water, Celine found herself on a dock at night, staring out at the sea with a hatred that had become a kind of devotion. A child approached, barefoot, salt-stained, carrying a small lantern. Captain, the child whispered, my father says you fought Longbeard. Celine didn't turn. I didn't fight him. I survived him. The child swallowed. Is he a demon? Celine's jaw tightened. She stared at the black water and thought of green eyes that judged everything. No, she said quietly. He's worse. The child frowned. Worse than a demon? Celine's voice came like ash. A demon has rules. A demon serves something. She finally looked down at the child. Longbeard serves only himself. The child's face went pale. Can he be stopped? Celine looked back out to sea. In her mind, she saw fog, bells, blood, a man laughing because chaos was the only truth he trusted, and she realized the cruelest part of all. Longbeard wasn't invincible. He was untouchable. Not because no blade could cut him, but because no one could reach the part of him that still remembered being human. Celine whispered, almost to herself, he'll stop when the sea stops. And far out beyond the harbor lights, where the water turned to darkness, a faint curl of smoke rose like a breath, as if the ocean itself had heard her, as if it was